My name is Hazel. I am 68 years old, and I spent 34 years behind the service counter at the Ontario Land Titles Office in Perth. I registered property transfers, processed title searches, and certified instruments going back to Crown patents from the 1820s. I know what a real document feels like before I've read a single word of it. On the second Sunday of January, my son came for dinner. He was 43. He had 2 full bowls of lamb stew and then helped my 9-year-old granddaughter with a crossword puzzle, and then he stood at my kitchen sink and turned his phone around so I could see the screen and nobody behind me could. A wire transfer confirmation, TD Bank, $4,200,000, received to my account the previous Thursday. I asked him why 3 times. He dried a pot that was already dry and said 4 words, "Ask me in February." He didn't smile when he said it. He kissed the top of my head and walked out to the back porch to say his goodbyes. 9 days later, my son was dead. Welcome back to Fierce Mom Stories, where women who've been told to stay quiet tell you exactly what happened and let you decide who was right. Drop a comment and subscribe before we go any further, because what comes next will test your patience in the best possible way. Let me tell you what I did for 34 years, because it explains every single thing I did after. The Land Titles Office keeps the official record of who owns what in this province, every mortgage, every transfer, every easement, every lien. When someone buys property in Ontario, they're trusting a chain of registered instruments going back sometimes 200 years. My job was to make sure that chain was intact. A transfer can't skip a link. A lien can't vanish without a proper discharge registered against title. I have caught errors that would have cost families everything. An estate that forgot to transfer a parcel before probate closed, a right-of-way from 1962 that nobody had ever bothered to discharge. 34 years. I can still feel the difference between a properly executed instrument and one that someone was sloppy about. After my husband passed in 2013, my son handled things for me. Property tax, car insurance renewals, the title transfer on the truck. I let him because he was good at it and because it gave us something useful to talk about on Sundays. I never once thought I would need to prove anything about my own name. There were 8 of us at the table that January. My son and his wife Tessa, my daughter Cora, who had driven up from Kingston with her 2 kids, my granddaughter Ivy, who is 9, and my grandson Eli, who is 6, and 2 people who had never once sat at my table before. Tessa's mother, Yvonne, and Tessa's younger brother, Todd. Tessa had asked if she could bring them. I said, "Of course." You always say, "Of course." Yvonne walked the length of my kitchen before she sat down. She paused at the sideboard and picked up the photograph of my husband standing in front of the hardware store he managed for 22 years, studied it the way someone studies a price tag, and set it down without saying anything. Todd talked through the soup course with his mouth not quite closed. Halfway through the lamb stew, he leaned back in his chair, just far enough to be deliberate about it, and said, loud enough for the whole table, "So what did the company end up selling for?" We heard it was pretty significant. Nobody answered him. Ivy asked for more bread rolls. My son got up, went out to his truck, and came back with a manila envelope. Standard size, the kind you get at Staples, and set it face down beside my plate, half tucked under the edge of the placemat, and sat back down the way a man sits down after returning a salt shaker. I assumed it was something to do with my husband's old survey records. My son had been talking about organizing them for 2 years. Then he caught my eye across the table and turned his phone screen toward me. $4,200,000, TD Bank, account in my name, value date, Thursday, January 9th. I looked at it for a long time. Then I looked at him. "It cleared Thursday," he said, low enough that only I could hear it. "It's yours. It's done." "Why?" He dried a spoon that didn't need drying. "Ask me in February." "Read." "February, Mum." That was it. He pulled a pen from his jacket, opened the envelope's flap without removing anything, and pointed at a line inside. "Sign right here for me." I signed. I want you to understand how unremarkable that felt. He had done the exact same thing at Christmas 2 years ago, when I signed a card for the woman who cleaned his office. You sign when someone you trust hands you something. He put the pen in his jacket pocket and kissed the top of my head, and then he went to find Tessa out on the porch. Everybody was gone by 9. I washed the pot by hand. I always wash the pot by hand. At 10:30, I sat down at the kitchen table with the envelope and my reading glasses. There was a typed label on the front, Hazel, delivery copy. In the corner, a red and white registered mail sticker with a long article number. I ran my thumb across the adhesive. Original. Not reprinted. 34 years in titles. I know what a genuine label looks like. Inside, a deed of gift and acknowledgement. Executed January 9th, 2025. Transferor. My son's full legal name. Recipient. Me. Property described as the transferor's sole and separate property. $4,200,000, a cash gift. A Commissioner of Oaths stamp at the bottom. I ran my thumbnail across it, raised seal, real. And on the second page, a signature line I had not registered when I signed it. Acknowledgement of receipt by Duneen. And below that, in my own handwriting, my name. Dated January 12th, 2025. He hadn't asked me to sign a greeting card. Under the deed there was more. A lot more. A one-page letter from a cardiologist at Kingston General, dated January 9th, 2025, confirming my son had attended a pre-operative consultation that morning and was fully alert, oriented, and under no medication affecting judgment or cognition. A letter from his accountant in Kingston confirming source of funds, proceeds from the sale of his company shares, a transaction that closed in November 2024. A bank statement for an account I had never seen before, also at TD, opened November 8th, 2024. One deposit on the day it was opened. Nothing else in. Not a dollar, not a payroll transfer, not a household expense. And tucked at the very back, held with a small binder clip, a sealed envelope no bigger than a card. 2 words typed on the front, open in February. I sat with my hand flat on that stack until the kitchen clock moved past midnight. I did not open the small envelope. He said February. The envelope said February. 34 years of working with title chains taught me one rule that is not a moral position. It is a survival habit. You do not read a document out of order. If you skip ahead, you will convince yourself of something that isn't there. I put every page back exactly as it came out and placed the whole envelope in the sideboard drawer, underneath the tablecloths. In October of 2024, my son had gone in for a life insurance physical. They flagged something on the ECG. He was referred to a cardiologist in Kingston who sent him to a specialist at Kingston General Hospital. The diagnosis was hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, a hereditary thickening of the heart muscle, manageable but requiring surgical intervention, and something that had been sitting in his chest since birth without a single symptom. They scheduled a corrective procedure for February 18th, 2025. He told me he had not given his wife the complete picture. He said she found medical appointments difficult to absorb, and he would sit down with her once the date was confirmed and the pre-op was done. Ask me in February. He had run the numbers. He planned to be on the other side of the surgery before we had that conversation. He got the arithmetic right. He got the calendar wrong by 19 days. The week after the dinner was an ordinary week. Cora called Monday to ask how the evening had gone. I told her Yvonne had picked up the photograph of her father and set it back down without saying a word, and Cora laughed for a full minute. I did not tell her about the wire transfer. People have asked me about that, in a tone that suggests keeping quiet is the same as being deceptive. 34 years of holding other people's property documents. Estates in dispute, divorces, liens filed against men with nothing left. Teaches you to carry information without setting it down in front of whoever happens to be nearby. It stops being discipline and starts being personality. And there was a simpler reason. I didn't understand it yet. You do not register an instrument you haven't finished reading. On the Thursday, I called the TD branch here in town. A teller who has been there for years went quiet for a moment longer than a teller usually does, and then she said, "Yes, that balance is current." I thanked her, hung up, and went to clear the driveway. Not hiding anything, just waiting to have something to say. On the Sunday, 9 days after that dinner, my son called me at 10 in the morning. We talked about a snowblower he'd been looking at and whether Eli was old enough to start skating lessons. He said he'd be up the following weekend. He said, "Love you, Mum," the way he had said it since he was 5. Fast. All run together. At 1:52 that afternoon, he was in the parking lot of a building supply store on the edge of Kingston, loading lumber into his truck. His heart went into sudden arrhythmia. A woman in the next row called 911 within a minute. The paramedics arrived in 9 minutes. It would not have mattered if they had arrived in 4. He was pronounced at Kingston General at 2:34 p.m. 19 days before the procedure that would have addressed the condition he did not know he had been born with. My phone rang at 3:15. It was Tessa. She did not say his name. She did not say there's been an accident, or Reed is gone, or you need to sit down. The first words my daughter-in-law said to me on that afternoon were, "Do you know anything about a bank account?" I said, "Tessa, what happened?" And she told me. I sat down on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets and stayed there until the light moved across the window. But I heard the order of it. The order of it is something I have never been able to unhear. My son's wife knew how to ask about a bank account before she knew how to contact the funeral home. The next morning, I drove to Kingston. Tessa had a yellow legal pad going by the time I arrived, columns in different colored pens. Who to notify, which accounts to close, the name of the funeral director. She had not cried. Not once, not with me in the room. Yvonne was in the bedroom, going through my son's closet with her phone raised. I walked past the door, and she had his watches laid out on the bed, photographing each one individually. And Todd was carrying a banker's box down the hallway. Then another, then 2 more stacked under his chin, one hand pressed against the top, and he grinned at me over them and said, "Just helping her get organized." 4 boxes. I counted because counting is what I do instead of screaming. When he was gone, I stood in the office doorway. My son's lateral file cabinet was under the window, gray, 2 drawers, a keyhole lock in the top corner. He'd had it since the year he started the company. The lock plate was scratched raw. The frame around it was bent slightly outward, a gap you could fit a thumbnail into. Somebody had put something flat in there and leaned on it. I did not say a word. I went home. The death notice went up on the funeral home's website that evening, Monday, January 20th, while I was still driving north on the 7. I read it in my driveway with the car running. My son's full name, 43, Kingston, founder of Meridian Mechanical Services, hockey coach, husband, and the list of survivors, his wife, Tessa, her mother Yvonne, her brother Todd, and other relatives. Other relatives. I read it 4 times to make sure I wasn't inventing an insult. My name is not a long name. It would have cost them nothing. Cora was not in it either. Neither were Ivy and Eli, the only 2 children in that entire extended family who had called him uncle and meant it. It ran in the local paper that Wednesday. Word for word. A woman I have known for 16 years saw me reading my phone in the IGA aisle, turned her cart, and went the long way around to the next section. She has borrowed my extension ladder twice. She did not say hello. There is no graceful way to greet a woman whose son's death notice you just read without her name in it. An obituary is not a registered instrument. It won't hold up in a title search, but it tells you who has picked up the pen and started writing the official version of your family. Somebody had been drafting fast. One day after he died. On the Tuesday afternoon, 4 of them appeared at my front door. Tessa in a dark coat and sunglasses, though the January sky was flat white and sunless. Yvonne behind her with her arms folded. Todd leaning against my porch post like he had been specifically invited to lean there. And a man I had never seen before in a gray wool overcoat with a briefcase. He introduced himself as Blake Morrow, from a firm in Toronto, and he handed me a document folder. Notice of claim and demand for accounting. "Mrs., there's been an improper transfer of matrimonial assets," he said. "Nobody wants this to go any further than it needs to." My son had been dead for 5 days. He had not been buried. There was a casserole from the church sitting untouched on my counter, and this man was standing on my front walk saying, "Matrimonial assets." Yvonne looked past me into the house and said, "Hazel, I'd like my blue casserole dish back. The one I brought at Christmas in 2021. It was my mother's. I bought that dish at a church rummage sale in 2008. But this is not the moment to argue about bakeware." I told her I'd look for it. Then Tessa took off her sunglasses and said the sentence I have heard every night since in whatever version of sleep I manage. "He built that company while we were married. That makes it ours. You were just somewhere he came on Sundays." The light snow had started. Blake Morrow reached into his briefcase and produced a second document, a deed of gift, rescission, and acknowledgement. He explained it standing there while my begonias sat frozen solid in the pots, on either side of the door. My son had been under significant stress and medical pressure. The gift had been made without proper reflection. The funds would simply be returned to the estate, and the family could grieve without a legal process. He held out a pen. I took it. I want to tell you exactly what happened in the next 30 seconds, because if this story helps one person, this is the part. For 34 years, when a man in a good coat handed me a document and said, "Sign here," I signed. That was the job. Somebody with authority decided. I made it official. I was very good at the second part and had had no practice at the first. My hand was on that pen, and I was looking at the signature block when my eyes moved where they have moved automatically for 3.5 decades, to the dates. Page 2. Recitals, whereas the transferor having died on January 18th, 2025. My son died on Sunday, January 19th. I received the call at 3:15 in the afternoon. Kingston General pronounced him at 2:34 p.m. on the 19th. I have the death certificate in my sideboard drawer. That document had been drafted before anyone verified the date of death. Someone had told a lawyer what they knew over the phone, and a lawyer had typed it up in a hurry. And nobody had waited for the death certificate. I capped the pen and held it out to him. "I'll need someone to look at this first," I said. Blake Morrow's face did something small and controlled, and then it smoothed itself back over. They walked to the car. Yvonne stayed on my porch under the overhang with the snow coming off the gutter between us. She talked to me almost kindly, which was worse than if she had been hostile. She told me about 1997. She had been married to Tessa's father for 19 years. 6 months before he filed for divorce, he moved the family business into a numbered company registered in his brother's name in Alberta. By the time her lawyer traced it, there was nothing on the books but a lease and a line of debt. She walked out of a 19-year marriage with $30,000 and a used Civic. Tessa was 12, Todd was 15. "So don't tell me about paperwork," she said. "I know exactly how it works. I've been on the receiving end of it." And I stood there and felt genuinely sorry for her, for about as long as it takes to feel a thing before you remember something else. I remembered the bridal shower in October 2015 at a restaurant in Kingston. Tessa had stood up with a glass of wine and made a little speech that got a laugh from her side of the room. "My mother taught me one thing," she said. "Get your name on it before he changes his mind." Everyone laughed. My son laughed. I put down my fork. Yvonne was not wrong about what had happened to her 28 years ago. She was just pointing it at the wrong woman. That Friday, I went to the TD branch and asked to see everything they could legally show me. The branch manager printed the wire record, $4,200,000, January 9th, 2025, originating account, TD Bank, account ending 4471, open November 8th, 2024. And I asked him the only question that mattered, the same question I used to ask about a title chain before I would certify anything. Had that originating account ever received a deposit from any other source after it opened? He said he couldn't tell me, that it wasn't my account, and he'd need legal authority to go further. I said of course, and I meant it. He was doing his job correctly, which was more than I could say for anyone else that week. Driving home on the 7 with the winter fields gray, on both sides, I did the arithmetic I had been avoiding. November 2024 to January 2025. 2 months of statements in an account with one single deposit and nothing in after. Nobody opens a dedicated account by accident. You open one when you need to prove something specific later. I got home, made tea, and took the envelope out from under the tablecloths. I spread everything on the kitchen table the way I used to lay out a complex title run. Face up, in order, nothing stacked. I'll tell you what was there, because every piece of it mattered. The deed of gift, properly executed, raised seal, my acceptance signature on page 2. The cardiologist's letter. My son was alert and fully capable on the morning of January 9th, the same morning he made the transfer. The accountant's letter. Source of funds confirmed as the proceeds of the November 2024 share sale, a transaction that had cleared all applicable tax before a dollar moved. The separate bank account statement, opened the day the sale closed, one deposit, nothing in after. Not a paycheck, not a household transfer, not a refund, and attached to the accountant's letter, as Exhibit B, a document I had to read 3 times, a marriage contract, dated March 3, 2020. Signed by my son and his wife, entered into under Section 52 of the Ontario Family Law Act. I read the operative language 4 times. In March of 2020, when my son was raising his first significant outside investment for Meridian Mechanical Services, the investors had required clarity on the ownership structure of his shares. His corporate solicitor had advised him that, given the company was built during the marriage, he and Tessa should enter a marriage contract under the Family Law Act, explicitly excluding his shares, and all proceeds from those shares, from the calculation of net family property. Both parties had signed it, and because that's how a marriage contract holds up in Ontario, each of them had been required to obtain independent legal advice first. There on page 8 of the contract, a certificate of independent legal advice, signed by Tessa. Witnessed by her solicitor, a family law practitioner named Anita, at a firm called Sherwood Family Law in Kingston. Dated March 3, 2020. This was a photocopy. I knew exactly where the original had gone. I had stood in the office doorway and seen the bent lock plate. But here is what 34 years teaches you. A photocopy is only as reliable as the person who can verify it, and a dead man cannot stand in a courtroom and confirm his own files. I needed the original to come from somewhere that no one connected to this dispute had ever touched. I retained a family law litigator in Ottawa, Suzanne. On the Tuesday morning, they filed their claim against me. The cause number was filed in the Ontario Superior Court of Justice. Tessa as surviving spouse plaintiff, me defendant. Her action was under Section 72 of the Family Law Act. Improper disposition of property to defeat a spouse's rights, and a direct challenge to the marriage contract under Section 56(4) on grounds of unconscionability. A judge signed a Mareva injunction, freezing my account that same afternoon without hearing from me. That is legal and normal. It still felt like watching someone change the lock on your own front door. The next morning, I sat in Suzanne's office in Ottawa, with the manila envelope on her desk. She read for 18 minutes, turning pages with one finger. Then she took her reading glasses off. This is the best documented private gift I have seen in 20 years of practice, she said, and it can still lose. She laid it out plainly. Tessa would testify she signed the marriage contract without understanding it, under the pressure of a fast-moving deal day. The original was gone. A photocopy attached to a dead man's files is only as credible as the dead man. We needed a second source. Something from 2020 that had been sitting untouched somewhere neutral, somewhere nobody in this dispute had ever had access to. I was looking at the Rideau Canal through her window when the thought arrived before I'd finished forming the question. The ILA certificate named the firm that gave Tessa independent legal advice. Anita, Sherwood Family Law, Kingston. In Ontario, a lawyer's obligation to retain client files runs for a minimum of 10 years under Law Society rules. 2020 was 5 years ago. That file was still in Kingston. We couldn't simply demand it. It belonged to Tessa's former solicitor's client, which was Tessa. But Tessa had put the underlying contract directly in issue in her own litigation. Through the discovery process, we could compel production of the ILA certificate as a document going to the heart of the contract's validity. Suzanne served the request on Sherwood Family Law within the week. Their response came 11 days later. File confirmed. Certificate of Independent Legal Advice for Tessa Voss, dated March 3, 2020, retained in original form in the client file. Certified copy available upon standard copying fees. The fee was $40. I kept the receipt. I always keep the receipt. We filed everything with the court the Thursday before the hearing. That same week, Todd posted to a community Facebook group that had been set up in my son's memory. 340 members, former employees, contractors, clients. He said that Reed's mother had taken advantage of a man who wasn't well. He said Tessa had been left with nothing. He said the family only wanted fairness. 47 supportive comments. In the middle of the thread, someone asked Todd why he had left Meridian Mechanical in 2022. He posted his version publicly for the first time. He said it had been a misunderstanding. Here is what actually happened, because my son told me once, and I never forgot it. Todd had been hired as a project coordinator in early 2022 because he was family. By September, an internal review had matched his submitted mileage and expense claims against the GPS records in the company trucks. $6,000 in size-in claims over 4 months for trips that had never taken place. My son did not press charges. He told Todd it was a misunderstanding and showed him to the door. Todd has been telling the parking lot version ever since. I did not post a single word. I did not comment. I did not explain myself to one person in this county. My daughter Cora drove up from Kingston the next morning without asking. She is 41. She is a school nurse, which means she is calm at exactly the moments other people stop being calm, and then quietly furious in the moments nobody expects it. She wanted to respond to the post that day, right then, at my kitchen table. I told her nobody has ever changed their mind because of a comment. They change their minds because of a certified copy. She sat down and looked at my legal pad with the columns I'd been keeping. She didn't understand a line of it and stayed for 3 days anyway. That is a kind of loyalty I would recommend to anyone. She told me something she had noticed the day after Reed died. When she arrived in the morning, the lateral file cabinet in his office had been locked. By that afternoon, it was open and bent. I wrote it down: date, time, what she saw, what she was looking for when she tried it. The night before the hearing, Tessa called me. No lawyer on the line. She sounded younger than she had in years. She asked me whether Reed had said anything at the end. It was the most honest thing she had asked me in 10 years of being family. I could have been vague. There would have been a small use in it. Instead, I told her the truth. That the woman who had started CPR in the parking lot told the paramedics that Reed had said Tessa's name before he lost consciousness. The line was quiet. She breathed in. And then her voice came back with something solid under it, and she said, "You know, he wasn't himself at the end. A man that close to a surgery isn't making clear decisions. Bring the papers tomorrow, and we'll settle at $1.5 million, and none of this has to go any further." 3 seconds. That's what I got. 3 seconds of my daughter-in-law being a widow instead of a plaintiff. I said good night and hung up, and I opened the file one more time, checked the article number on the registered mail receipt against my copy, and turned out the kitchen light at 11:30. The Ontario Superior Court of Justice building in Perth is limestone, built in the 1840s on the main square. I have walked past it on my way to the post office for 30 years. Inside, the courtroom has high ceilings and tall windows that let in flat winter light. It was February 4th. The gallery was fuller than I expected. My son's accountant had driven over from Kingston in a suit that had been his best suit for 20 years. The cardiologist's office manager had flown in from Kingston to be there in person. 2 of Reed's original investors came in their good winter coats, A young woman from the local paper sat at the end of a row with a notebook open. Cora sat directly behind me, and a woman I had met twice at family dinners, Tessa's father's sister, whom I had never known well, came in quietly at the last moment and sat on my side of the aisle. I have never asked her why. Blake Morrow opened well. I will give him that. He told the court that property built through a spouse's labor during a marriage is included in the equalization of net family property under the Ontario Family Law Act, he said. The marriage contract had been signed in the pressure of a commercial transaction, in a stack of documents, in circumstances that made meaningful consent impossible. He described a 36-year-old widow who had stood beside her husband for 11 years. It sounded right. If I had walked in off the street with no information, I might have believed it too. Tessa testified first. She was composed and clear. She described 11 years, the early years when my son worked 18-hour days and she held everything else together, the year they lived on the company credit card and a line of credit, she said. She answered the company phone from their kitchen table for the first 2 years because they couldn't afford a receptionist. Some of what she said was true. I know which parts. Then Blake Morrow asked her the question. Tessa, at any point during your marriage, did you sign any agreement relating to your husband's company or its shares? She looked at the gallery before she answered. No, never. I would remember signing something like that. I would remember signing away 11 years. Blake Morrow moved to tender his exhibit package, a binder he certified as a true and complete copy of the relevant corporate and financial records. The judge turned pages for about a minute. Then he stopped. Counsel, your bait stamp numbers run 1 through 9 and then 14. Pages 10 through 13 aren't here. Our copy is complete, Your Honor. The judge wrote something down and did not say what. On cross-examination, Suzanne asked Tessa one question. She asked her whether she had ever consulted a solicitor named Anita at a firm called Sherwood Family Law on the main street in Kingston, in or around March of 2020. Tessa said she might have gone there about something unrelated, once. Suzanne placed the certified copy of the ILA certificate on the bench. There is no version of, I might have gone there about something else that survives a document bearing Tessa's own signature, the notarial stamp, the date, March 3, 2020, and the words, I hereby certify that I have provided independent legal advice to the signatory respecting the nature and effect of the within-marriage contract, and that she signed same of her own free will with full understanding of its contents. The judge examined it for a long time without speaking. Then I took the stand. I went through the file the way I would have walked a new clerk through a chain of title on a complex state file. I did not hurry, and I did not editorialize. The deed of gift, properly executed, raised seal. The cardiologist letter, January 9th, my son alert and capable at the moment of transfer. The bank statement on the dedicated account. 1 deposit, nothing in after. Not a dollar commingled with household funds. The accountant's letter confirming the source of the funds. Suzanne asked me to explain why the separate account was the most important document in the file. Under the Ontario Family Law Act, the general rule is equalization of net family property. Each spouse's assets accumulated during the marriage, with certain exclusions. Gifts and inheritances are excluded from net family property, but only if they are kept separate. If a gift is deposited into a joint account and household spending runs through it, it can lose its character as excluded property. My son understood that. He opened an account with 1 deposit, the proceeds of the share sale, and nothing went in after. No salary, no refund, no transfer from any joint account. No commingling ever occurred. There was nothing for the equalization provisions to touch. Then the marriage contract. Under Section 52 of the Family Law Act, spouses can enter a written contract providing that some or all of the equalization provisions do not apply to them. My son and Tessa had done exactly that in 2020 with independent legal advice on both sides. Then the date error on the rescission document they had brought to my front door. January 18th. My son died on January 19th. A document drafted before anyone verified the death certificate, in a hurry, from what a client told a lawyer on the phone. The judge asked me how I had located the ILA certificate. The marriage contract named the firm that gave Tessa independent legal advice, I said. A certificate of ILA belongs to the advising lawyer's file. The Law Society of Ontario requires file retention for a minimum of 10 years. 2020 was 5 years ago. We requested it through the discovery process. What did the certified copy cost? $40, Your Honor. Somewhere in the gallery, someone exhaled. Tessa's lawyer moved to withdraw his exhibit package. The judge declined the motion. He ruled from the bench, which I was told afterward was unusual. The Mareva injunction was dissolved. The Section 72 claim was dismissed. The evidence did not support a finding of improper disposition, in part because the marriage contract was valid and the net family property calculation did not include the company proceeds. The challenge to the marriage contract under Section 56(4) failed on the evidence. The judge described the documentation as comprehensive, carefully sequenced, and consistent with a transferor who understood precisely what he was doing and why. Costs awarded against Tessa and her solicitor jointly, $19,000, a referral to the Law Society of Ontario regarding Blake Morrow's conduct in certifying an exhibit package with 4 pages missing, was noted in the endorsement. He withdrew from the file the following week. In the hallway by the water fountain, Blake Morrow tried one last time. He said there was still room for a quiet resolution, that it would be better for everyone if this stayed a family matter. I said, "It is a family matter, Mr. Morrow. This family just keeps its records in order." I walked out into the cold February air and sat in my car for 10 minutes with the engine off. Not triumphant, that is not the word. I felt like a woman who had gotten her son's paperwork through on time, which is exactly what he had built it for her to do. I drove home, I made tea, and then I opened the small sealed envelope. 1 page. Typed. His signature at the bottom in his handwriting, the same signature I watched him practice at my kitchen table when he was 17 and opening his first bank account, because I told him he would carry that signature his whole life and he should make it worth carrying. He was not going to explain the money. He had already explained the money in a notarized deed, a cardiologist's letter, an accountant's certification, and a bank statement with 1 deposit in it. That part was finished, and he knew it was finished. What he wanted to tell me in February was about a piece of land. My father's farm, 140 acres outside Westport in Lanark County. We sold it in 1991 when a debt came, due the year the prices dropped and there was nothing else to sell. I was 34 years old. I sat in the truck outside the land registry office while my father went inside alone to sign the transfer. I have thought about that afternoon more times than I can account for. My son had been watching the listing since September. A portion of the original farm, 78 acres, including the cedar bush and the creek at the north end, had come up for sale when the estate of the most recent owner went through probate. He'd already had a boundary surveyor walk the north lot line and certify it. He wanted to drive me out there on a Saturday in the spring, windows down, and let me walk the fence line and hear the creek before he mentioned the price. He wanted me to buy it back, and he wrote 1 line about why. 34 years making sure other people's records were right. Mum, put your name on something that's yours. I closed on the 78 acres in April at a title company office in Westport. The conveyancing solicitor handed me the commitment documents, and I read all of them, which nobody does anymore. I found 1 error, a reference to a drainage easement that had been partially released in 1988 and never properly noted on the registered title. I flagged it before I signed anything. They corrected it that afternoon. Then I signed my name on the first line, mine alone. I put money aside for Ivy and Eli in registered education savings accounts in their own names, with nobody's signature required but theirs when the time comes. I donated to the Lanark County Land Trust for the preservation of the cedar wetlands, a long, the creek adjacent to the property. My father would have understood that better than almost anything else I could have done with the money. And on the first Sunday in May, I made lamb stew in the same cast iron pot I have used since my husband, and I bought it at an estate auction in 1987. One handle cracked and he wired it, and I have never had it properly repaired because it suits the pot. There were 7 of us, Cora and Ivy and Eli. Gary, my son's accountant, who brought his wife and a bottle of wine from Prince Edward County. Anita, from Sherwood Family Law, who had certified that Isla in 2020, and driven down from Kingston because she wanted to know how it had ended, and an empty chair at the head of the table. We all looked at it once, then we passed the pot and ate. That fall, I wrote 3 sentences to Tessa and sent them by post. I told her I was sorry for her loss, which remains true and will not stop being true. I told her the door was not open. And I told her that she spent 11 years next to a man who knew how to build things that held, and the most useful thing she could do now was decide whether she wanted to learn how to do the same. I have not heard back. I did not expect to. After 68 years, 34 of them spent making certain that every link in a property chain was documented, certified, and accounted for. Here is the only thing I know for certain. People can take your name out of the story. They can leave it off the announcement, draft the official version while you're still sitting on your kitchen floor, and count on you being too grieved or too polite to open the file. And none of it changes what is true. Because the truth was never sitting in someone else's willingness to acknowledge you. It was in the record. It was always in the record, waiting for someone who knew exactly which counter to walk up to and ask. That's my story, if it reminded you to look at your own paperwork this week. The deed on your house, the account you have not checked in 5 years, the agreement you signed in a stack of documents because someone you trusted said to. Go do that now. Drop a comment below. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.